Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Bienvenue pour cette conférence Talking Heads. Quelques mots très, très brefs en français avant de céder la parole à Daniel et à Lisa. En anglais, les deux. Voilà. Peut-être simplement pour déjà dire un très, très grand merci à Daniel van der Velden, que nous sommes vraiment très heureux d'accueillir à plusieurs titres. Évidemment, d'abord, vos présences nombreuses en donnent témoignage. C'était évidemment une chance, un privilège de pouvoir accueillir Daniel pour une telle rencontre. Mais ça va encore un petit peu plus loin pour ce qui nous concerne, parce qu'au fond, c'est déjà toute une histoire que nous avons entre l'école et Daniel. Daniel a fait partie avec Metahaven, donc avec ses complices de cette aventure, des personnes que nous avons sollicitées au tout début, au démarrage de notre master espace et communication. Il figurait dans notre toute première brochure comme l'un des intervenants pressentis pour cette formation. Et je dois dire qu'à l'époque, on n'était pas trop en retard, puisque c'était 2008, nos premières discussions, et le studio Metahaven a été formé à Amsterdam en 2007, si j'ai bonne mémoire. Donc c'était vraiment un tout jeune studio, mais qui déjà suscitait l'attention à une échelle internationale et suscitait les désirs de rencontres. Et donc cela a pris forme très vite. Je ne pense pas que vous alliez parler de ça, j'espère. Mais puisque dès 2009-2010, durant cette année-là, nous avons invité Metahaven pour un workshop. Et donc Daniel lui-même, qui s'appelait Geneva Identities, Institutions, Spaces. Et le workshop avait notamment consisté à amener les étudiants du master, donc espace et communication, à créer des sortes de nouvelles cartographies de Genève. Et c'est un workshop qui avait mené à de très, 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 très beaux résultats. Et donc nous avons gardé le contact avec Daniel en particulier. On aimerait l'avoir tous les ans, mais enfin, le contact a été conservé. Et Alexandra Midal, qui a organisé la rencontre de ce soir, merci Alexandra, avec Daniel, a réinvité Daniel à participer à un jury, toujours du master espace et communication, il y a 3 ans, je crois. Voilà. Et puis donc les retrouvailles de ce soir. Donc en gros, on se voit tous les 3 ans. Mm-hmm. Maybe we could do better in the future. But voilà, c'est au moins ça. Et donc c'est au titre de cette brève histoire, de ce compagnonnage entre finalement Metahaven, Daniel et l'école, que je suis particulièrement heureux de la rencontre de ce soir. Donc encore une fois, grand merci Daniel de t'être libéré pour ça et de nous faire l'amitié de cette rencontre. Et puis un tout petit mot, donc Lisa Artiemura, c'est bien ça ? Oui. Qui est étudiante au sein du master espace et communication en première année, eh bien va faire l'introduction de cette Talking Head. C'est voilà un dispositif qui avait été initié, que nous faisons de temps à autre, qui est courageux, donc merci de relever ce défi, et je crois que c'est évidemment une très bonne chose que de faire ainsi et de mettre aussi nos étudiants en scène dans ces moments de rencontre très très tôt. Enfin, dernière info, je vous donne le programme des Talking Heads à venir, vous allez voir que c'est quand même pas mal du tout, comme souvent. 27 avril prochain, nous recevrons John Armleder en discussion avec Lionel Bovier. Le 12 mai, nous accueillerons Mix et Remix John Armleder, je ne donne pas de précision, chacun sait qui il est dans le champ de l'art depuis quelques années. Mix et remix en mai, là évidemment il y a un contraste important, mais illustrateur, dessinateur de presse, lui aussi célèbre, dans un genre encore une fois très, très différent. Mais c'est aussi une rencontre préparée de longue date et dont nous sommes très heureux. Et enfin, le 25 mai, Peter Ippolito, invité par le département d'architecture. Peter Ippolito étant, vous connaissez peut-être un peu moins, il est déjà venu à l'école, un des architectes phares de la scène allemande, puisqu'il a un bureau qui travaille dans le monde entier et qui est basé à Stuttgart. Voilà pour le programme, et à vous maintenant. Merci.
Merci. Good evening. I'm Lisa Mora, a first-year student from the Master of Spaces and Communication here at HED. I would first like to thank the presence of everyone here tonight. I would also like to thank Alexandra Midal and Arne Matisse for the opportunity and responsibility of introducing our guest, Daniel van der Velden. And last but surely not least, I would like to thank Daniel for his presence and willingness to present us with a small yet considerable sample of his work here tonight. Graphic, communication, critical, speculative designer, researcher, writer, teacher. These are just a few of the titles Daniel has been collecting throughout his career. Born in the Netherlands, Daniel graduated from the Willem de Kooning Academy in 1996 in graphic design and later pursued his master's in design at the Jan van Eyck Academy. He runs the think tank studio Metahaven based in Amsterdam, along with its founding partner Vinca Kruk since 2007. While preparing for this short introduction, I came across an interview from 2010 where Daniel stated, and I quote, "Reality often provides the strongest form of fiction." With this statement in mind, it doesn't come as a surprise to see Daniel's strong ties to a critical, speculative, and even provocative approach in his projects, always based on an in-depth research on the subjects he sets his focus on. Starting from the Sea Land project, Metahaven's embryonary project, which consisted on an identity proposal for the offshore micronation Sea Land, a self-proclaimed principality which played an iconic role as a data haven during the late 1990s dot-com boom. Continuing on the discussion of the World Wide Web and its multiple virtual worlds, Metahaven published in 2008, the year the global financial crisis exploded, a pamphlet called White Knight Before a Manifesto. This manifesto is seen as a tribute to the legacy of the manifesto, which discusses the contemporary conditions of design practice and some of their political consequences. Later on, Metahaven made an incomplete exercise, as they say themselves, to develop a new identity to WikiLeaks and launched their first book in 2010 with the name Uncorporate Identity. Uncorporate Identity is a complex and dense book demonstrative of political networks and forces, crossing it with design and architecture matters, and said to be a design book for our dystopian age. 3 years later, in 2013, they published the ebook Can Jokes Bring Down Governments? Memes, Design, and Politics, with the Strelka Press publisher. It is a reflection on this serious-driven society of today and how this may be the hour to fight nonsense with nonsense in whatever form. And today it only makes me wonder what would they say about the humor and nonsense goldmine the 2016 US presidential candidate Donald Trump has become. And finally, one of Metahaven's most recent projects, the exhibition and the book Black Transparency, The Right to Know in the Age of Mass Surveillance. A result from the studio's collaboration with WikiLeaks, which focuses on understanding the phenomenon of involuntary transparency of organizations, systems, nations, forced upon by hackers and whistleblowers who use the internet as what it should be, a freedom haven. Black Transparency presents the dichotomy between this forced transparency of the institutions and the evasion of the underground collectives, like the well-known hacker group Anonymous, that forced them to be transparent. As said on one presentation of the exhibition, because its architecture depends on acts of evasion, Black Transparency is not only transparent, but also black. The book, the exhibition, the video that accompanies this project, and also a series of interviews with some of the most prominent activists, internet activists, politicians, theorists, which you can easily find online, explore different possibilities and architectures for these acts of evasion, and manifest for a decentralization and a relocation of political and technological processes that have become so abstract nowadays. It shows that it's no longer just a question of information, but a question of power attached to whoever holds it, even if it is said to be in the clouds. And to what purpose, as the current open battle of privacy between Apple and the US government is just one example of. I'm hoping that Daniel will go much deeper on this complex discussion in a few minutes. So, to end this introduction, what I appreciate in Daniel's work and Metahaven's work in general is its level of provocation, but not for provocation's sake, without ever being shallow or hollow, and always backed up by a profound understanding and observation of the context. Their work is analytically radical in the sense of seeking disruption to conformity and common sense, and never ignoring the point of view of design. I'm sure Daniel will demonstrate this with his own voice right after, but let me just finish with a quote from one of his interviews, which I found very interesting. What do most mainstream design practices do in terms of research and development? Very little, because a mainstream practice must start from ideas that are already affirmed. That is what you're not doing in design research. In design research and investigative practice, you start from things that are not affirmed. You theorize and intellectualize on possibilities and develop these into working models. So you depart from something that in the beginning sounds very unlikely to ever be true. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for this wonderful intro. I feel very humbled by it. And I'm not sure that I can actually back all this up. I think that interview was also very old that you just cited. And of course, we are also, people that must live and eat, etc. So we also, I think that there's a lot of space to move between pure research and let's say pure commissioned practice, whatever. So maybe we can turn the lights down a little bit. So the title of this talk is Propaganda About Propaganda. And it has a lot of our most recent work, but it also has some older stuff to talk about, I guess. And I'm going to try to do that in a sort of calm way. So if I go too fast or whatever, just tell me go faster, or tell me go slow or go faster, whatever. So most of the things that you talked about, Lisa, are in the presentation in some form, but others are not. So we'll just see what we come across along the way. This is a landscape from a recent film, The Sprawl, that we'll show some clips of, which is a documentary about propaganda in the internet age. That's why the talk is also called Propaganda About Propaganda, because it basically deals with our most recent research interest. And this is a couch floating while a eagle catches a drone and two hands making a heart. So the Dutch police are experimenting with animals to catch drones. So this is a Dutch eagle catching a Dutch drone in a sort of testing situation. Right. So here are two works that probably no one knows. One of them is sort of made, the other has never been made, and it sort of shows a little bit the sort of dichotomy of the sort of critical design. I think that, by the way, critical is a word that I don't like at all. Because so you can say critical and affirmative, but you can also say critical versus lyrical. And I think if we are critical, we are also lyrical, in the sense that we are very interested in aesthetics, and we are very interested in something as problematic as beauty. So on the left-hand side, you see a cover that was never made. And it was because Valden, a publishing house in London, asked us to design for what was then to be called a book called Graphic Agitation 3. And this has the sort of the crisis of the book is embodied in such a title, and the crisis of design journalism is embodied in such a title, and the crisis of design itself in some ways embodied in such a title. Graphic Agitation 3, Graphics, Art and Activism in the 21st Century. And we said, well, we're interested in doing this book, but we absolutely do want to do a sort of test with you guys. Like, can we design the cover? And if you don't like it, no problem. We'll not go ahead. It's fine. You won't need to pay for it, but just to test a little bit what we are feeling and thinking. So we put the Valden logo in the lowest quality JPEG that we could find. Then we added a few things. So we said graphic agitation 3, the definitive mega mix, which brought it into this atmosphere of the CD cover, and especially the kind of rave CDs, or the sort of, the end of the CD, at the end of the 1990s when you had all these compilation CDs. Anyway, and then there's like 3 pictures. One is an exhausted worker who fell asleep on the computer. That is the designer. Then there is a few people holding the flag of Islamic State. And then there's a shot from the 2006 film Children of Men, in which the protagonist sits in front of the Guernica painting, which in this film has been privatized and is owned by a private collector who holds it in his kind of like, living room. So these 3, and then there's a little diagram, SOS, LOL, what we'll talk about later. So this was not accepted, but they said, can you change it, etc.? Can you tweak it? Can you take the ISIS flag out, etc.? And we said, no, this was why we did it like this, right? So we were able to test whether we belong together, and we love you, but probably we're not the right designers for you. And then in the end, they end up changing the complete book. The book's now out. It has a different title. We even have it by some reason, and it's actually turned out much, much nicer than the original plan. So our sort of principled way of dealing with these types of things is not to say that nothing good can come out of such a commission. And on the right-hand side, there is a wallpaper that we designed as a contribution to an exhibition in Spain that took place in Spain. And it was a wallpaper themed around the Gaza bombardments by Israel. And it said, "The ruins of Gaza are the ruins of our civilization." And the title of the wallpaper was Silent Dazzle, which is also somehow in the background. So as Lisa said, recently our book came out, Black Transparency, and it is a book with a cover with holes in it. So it has the feel of a pocket book, kind of thriller, novel feeling, the paper, etc., but it has holes. And these are some random moments in that book that, as she already explained, is all started by the interests that were triggered by our spontaneous collaboration with WikiLeaks a couple of years ago, and then it took forever to finish the book. So it came out much later than we wanted, and also the topic kept changing. So whenever something happened, we had to change the book, and at some point we said, freeze, nothing, we're going to publish it. That's it. But the book itself contains many more pieces than only WikiLeaks, such as this letter which we wrote to Euro parliamentarians, called "Letter to a Eurocrat About Data Retention." And this letter was written in December 2011, and it was sent to all the Euro parliamentarians who voted for data retention at the time. And that means data retention means that they keep your data, your cell phone data, your internet data for a certain amount of time, and usually quite long. And we wrote a kind of letter of critique to these guys and girls, both. So it said, "Dear Eurocrat, passive resistance. You said yes, you voted for storing people's email, text messages, and cell phone calls. More precisely, you voted yes for the Directive 2006-24 EC of the European Parliament and of the Council of 15 March 2006 on the retention of data generated or processed in connection with the provision of publicly available electronic communication services of our public communications networks and amending Directive 2002-58 EC. Data retention became the new neutral, the next normal. Because which good Europeans would be in their right mind to have something to hide from the government when security is at stake? You did it. You helped build a Proxcard-protected surveillance superstate to the benefit of €1 billion spy industry financed with taxes. Thank you. In addition, here's the prototype you requested. Sincerely, S." And then there was a card attached to it. It was a mirror on one side, and on the other side it was a magnet. So hopefully they would sort of put this magnet somewhere and it would erase their data. Pretty much low-tech solution. But the S person here was meant to be Sophie Scholl, who in the Second World War quoted this from the White Rose movement, who the whole exhibition that we did, this part of was connected to that, and who quoted the term passive resistance. I'm not saying that the whole proposition, also in light of what happened yesterday in Brussels, actually really interesting, because these people didn't use the internet at all who did this. They used throwaway cell phones. So they evaded the attacks. The attackers in Brussels evaded the whole infrastructure that's there to spy on people, because they used they didn't use email, basically. Anyway, the prototype. So our work for WikiLeaks also consisted of a lot of proposals and sketches, such as for coffee mugs. Some of them were eventually made, but some were not. So this was all the result of a conversation with them, where they asked us to make really banal objects to sell to actually have a sort of additional source of income. And this is a quote from a philosopher named Benjamin Brereton that we work with quite a lot, and he said, "The geopolitics of the cloud is everything and wants everything." This was something he said when he was developing his book for MIT Press, The Stack, which now just came out, and which is really highly commendable. So the book, Black Transparency, begins with a kind of poem or film scenario in a way, and it starts with images or with film material from riots in Greece. And it's the voice of a person that has very little possessions, but the vision or the visual capacity to see through, or to want to see through things and to make things transparent. Silence and invisibility are the principal currencies of our utopia. Soon everything will be a secret. But what about ourselves? Aren't we silent ourselves? We haven't said anything in a long time. We battle. We throw Molotov cocktails, fight the police, and dance on the wings of a government airplane. We look into our phones that look into our lives, the bare possessions of a non-person living in a non-place, a laptop, a backpack, a night with friends, an on and off relationship, a temporary job, a trove of secrets. We have a non-plan. All we do is show that we still exist. Together we fall deeper. Nothing is to end our ecstatic conquest. Undoing all that was said and done before we came, unseeing everything with our eyes. We do not live in the same place. We weren't introduced. Please don't send us flowers. Send secrets. So it describes what you could say is like contemporary mentality. This is a piece we wrote about the origins of the WikiLeaks logo, Coup de Net, and it's we found the original designer of the WikiLeaks logo, this hourglass, this shape that they had and that they didn't want to change or do anything about, and we were super interested who could have made such a thing. So we went and we thought this must be somewhere, this information. We didn't ask WikiLeaks, and we found actually some traces online, etc. And then we found the person who likely did it, and she said she is a physicist from Australia at the time, studied with Assange. Her name is Ashka. She is Polish originally, and she said that it was a big surprise to hear from someone regarding the logo, because she never took any responsibility, any credit for it. It was just there, and we traced her via her illustration portfolio, and at some point we saw that there were illustrations that were quite the same as the logo, etc. So this was actually great to find a designer who was really a ghostwriter, anonymous, not credited, in a way going back to what design always was supposed to be, this secret art. And this is a chapter about WikiLeaks itself, which this line comes from the feature film that was once made about it, quite a bad film, but at some point there's this genius line. Assange is played by Benedict Cumberbatch, and he has this German colleague, Daniel Domscheit-Berg, played by another actor, and then this man is really angry at Assange, and he says, "There is no organization, there's only you." he says it angrily because he's frustrated with the way WikiLeaks is working and the fact that they don't have the kind of a transparent infrastructure, whatever, in the organization. Anyway, we took that as a link with Crass. There is no authority but yourself. And the book also talks a lot about chaos. And the fact that when we bring transparency into the world by releasing files or whatever, we never can predict what's happening exactly. So in fact, we are thinking that we're changing the world in one or another direction, but in fact, we are triggering forms of chaos. And you could think that's good or bad. You know, you can have different opinions about that. Anyway, so we trace that a little bit, and we'll hear more about that later on. And we're also big fans of slogans. So one of them is the personal is geopolitical, which has ended up in various things that we have done with other people as well. Here it refers to the decision of Chelsea Manning, the whistleblower, to actually she was at that time in the U.S. military in a base in Iraq, had access to all these files, and went through a personal period of intense change that has in the media been talked about as a kind of like identity crisis, which would mean that this leak was not legit because the person had an identity crisis. No, she had a kind of moment of insight where the personal became geopolitical, because we all know what happened after she actually leaked those files, and we saw the collateral murder video and other, things that WikiLeaks published. And in fact, it was around that time that we wanted to start working for them, and we were passionately in love with the way that they finally said something about what's happening in Iraq, and we're still living through. We're not nearly through the consequences of that horrifying invasion that happened. So it's also a little bit about open government and policy, those types of things. And it notes that the son of Muammar Gaddafi, Saif Gaddafi, wrote or actually had his PhD thesis at the London School of Economics written by a consultancy firm in the US. And he got the PhD, and it was largely about transparency. So the book consists of like a text part, which is more like a kind of like thriller novel, and then more like a visual parts that are more like a sort of zine. So we practice utopian design, and we our version of utopia is. I'm not sure how that has changed. It has started as Lisa noted, like with the Sealand Identity Project, which was to design an identity for this micronation that no one could really visit, and that claimed independence whilst in the North Sea. It sort of claimed sovereignty. So we were interested in this dream, and also in the cynicism of that dream, because of course they tried to use this island to make money or to create a business model. They tried a casino first, didn't work out, and then they tried to host an internet company, and the stuff that this internet company would have on its servers would be off limits to everyone, to all governments, whatever. But no one really wanted that. So they also, the Sealand royal family, which was basically the people that squatted Sealand in the 1960s, they turned down the idea. They didn't want it. They didn't want to be at risk of being sort of sent away from their holiday house, because it was basically just a holiday house for them, as they had a house on the English, in Essex somewhere, and then they went to Sealand sometimes, and they did that, of course, also for publicity and for romanticism. There was also a sheer romanticism involved in the whole act of creating Sealand. So the first years of our practice were basically just based on riffing off all the stuff that come out of our first project and the way in which it opened up, thinking about geography, political geography primarily, internet, jurisdiction, aesthetics, those types of things. So there were ads that we made for Sealand. Actually, so we were in touch with them. We did create some stuff for them, but just when we were about to create their commemorative coin, there was a huge fire on Sealand in 2007, and that ended the dream for us, which was the reason to start Metahaven, because we thought we wanted to do more stuff. Anyway, so these are spreads from the book Uncorporate Identity. This is also how our fascist-looking logo came into being, which is just repeated here a few times on the wall. And if you walk towards the venue, there's like even my first name initial is there, and then the logo. Anyway, but this was basically just started not as a fascist logo, the pi symbol, but as a way to think about structures. So here's the same symbol created out of two paper cups and the book Empire by Hart and Negri, which at the time was a huge inspiration for us, which theoretically has since been a little bit eclipsed, we must say, by other books, maybe. And also, we don't have all this time anymore to read. That's another problem. We are too often our sources nowadays are YouTube videos. We'll talk more about that too. So the ephemera of utopia, the ephemera of dreams, the ephemera of bubbles. That's what interests us in a way. And of course, there's always a confrontation with reality, or the way in which utopias are born out of reality and sort of fall back on them. In 2010, we had an amazing time in the south of Spain, where we were working with a farmer collective, Ecoagriculturas de Murcia. Sorry about this horrible pronunciation. Who were growing their own fruit in the orchards around this city, but with an age-old irrigation system, really beautiful, etc. And they were also people that we felt connected with. So we did fruit labels for their fruits that they had, and all the fruit was kind of medieval-looking, weird shapes, etc. Nothing industrial, everything kind of super organic. And these dealt with things like currencies. So we proposed new currencies such as favors and bribes. And they dealt with the relationship with North Africa, and they dealt also with the resistance movement against the exhibition that we were part of, which was Manifesta. Because there was this group called Murcia no se vende, Murcia is not for sale, which protested against the fact that Manifesta had eaten up the entire yearly culture budget of the city. So no more theater, no more going to the museum, only Manifesta. And eventually, we met with them, and we also gave them a place in the campaign, which eventually they liked. But this was in 2010, and it was basically a few months before the Arab Spring broke out. So in this time in Spain, okay, there was also no infrastructure to work. So there was no one. There was people helping, but it wasn't really enough. So eventually, everyone helped each other in this show to build the show in an old post office in the city, and there we met a group of artists called Take to the Sea, which were composed of someone from India, someone from Egypt, and someone from Italy, and their work dealt with the people that travel the Mediterranean by boat as migrants. How predictive of our current moment. And there was we spent a lot of time with them, etc., and also we were part of a kind of group discussion, etc., that we then documented in this magazine called The Exorcist. We also were the first ones since probably the mid-1980s to use vertically stretched type. But now, of course, now you can't do that anymore because it's, of course, a bit overused. But in 2010, it was still very fresh. So here's like the Exorcist on negotiation. That was the theme. It was a magazine published by Van Abbe Museum, and we did a piece about our time there in Murcia, and the piece that we participated in. This person is actually Vinca, co-founder of Metahaven, in the discussion. And on the left-hand side were two people from an American collective and a Canadian collective that were in a kind of frontal battle with the Metahaven and Take to the Sea. It ended up as a sort of Jerry Springer show of art collectives. And on the right-hand side, there's two people from Take to the Sea. Right before, let's say, they all became involved in different ways in the Arab Spring. And we also had this... We had this article that was written by a student of Amsterdam University about embedding democracy, political and social engagement under the Web 2.0 paradigm. And on the right-hand side, you see Hillary Clinton delivering her 2010 speech in the museum about the U.S., the possibilities of the U.S., of the internet for U.S. foreign policy. Basically claiming that all the digital tools, Facebook, Twitter, etc., are all brands of U.S. democracy, and that, in fact, the two are the same thing. So it was incredibly predictive of what was going to happen. And in fact, this came out a little bit when the Arab Spring was going. So also we asked two of the people from the collective to sort of look back on things. So now I'm going to go a little faster, because otherwise we'll be sitting here at like 11 p.m. and I'll be barely like at 2012 or something. These are a series of books we designed called Antennae with a Amsterdam-based publishing house called Valis. And the defining characteristic of this book is that they have these sort of patterned covers, which we call psychedelia for theory, and that they have a little label that's like a library label. So all the books are like part of a library, in a sense. They have this sort of idea that they're borrowed or they're public property or whatever. And now, largely, there's one author that's come to dominate the series with his work. So I'm not sure what's going to happen with this series, but we had lots of fun designing it. So basically, almost all our work deals with some sort of confrontation with the digital world and with the internet. And this is a still from a 2014 video called City Rising, where you see someone holding a cell phone, a Samsung Galaxy S3, if I'm not mistaken, and in the front you see a structure belonging to the New Babylon project, which was a series of models and sketches and paintings that were made by the Dutch architect Constant in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s and 70s, representing a utopian city where there would be no more work. Everyone would just play, and the work will be done by machines. And City Rising deals with the question, what do love and work have to do with each other in a sort of age where everyone's permanently performing free labor, and where emotional labor on the internet equals money for certain platforms like Facebook, etc. And it deals with those questions. And these are images from a campaign we developed that never really got off the ground properly for a group called Independent Diplomat. And Independent Diplomat are representing marginalized and unrecognized countries and groups for the UN, for the United Nations in New York. And one of their clients, so to speak, is Western Sahara. And Western Sahara is a domain in the western part of Sahara that's kind of having a claim to independence, but Morocco is preventing it. And these images were stacks of concepts that always come down to the ground. The ground layer is always Western Sahara, but since no one knows about Western Sahara, the other terms in the stack are kind of more well-known concepts, such as Snapchat or Kony 2012 or WhatsApp or the Human Genome or the Montevideo Convention, whatever, but it always ends up with Western Sahara. And for tons of reasons, this never made it beyond a billboard in St. Louis, the cover of Art in America, and a series of images on Tumblr. It's been talked about, WikiLeaks. Scarves for WikiLeaks, more kind of glamorous or in a sense ambiguous sense of promoting WikiLeaks through fashion items, and it has raised several thousand euros for them in terms of donations. So all the proceeds of this stuff were all donated given to WikiLeaks. So we did T-shirts, we did these various scarves, and we did also some of these more coffee-related things, such as mugs. So on the right-hand side, this was the beginning of the project when we printed the first series of scarves on nylon, or on polyester, I should say, in Korea in 2011. And this just came from the printer, so we put it on the floor of that place in Gwangju in Korea, and we photographed it. On the left-hand side is an intern of this magazine looking at an installation of these scarves in New York in 2013. And below that is an image from a presentation where the project was kicked off, where we talked about the relationship between WikiLeaks and Sweden. I'm not going to explain the visual pun because it should be obvious by now. This has led us to also design models for data centers, such as a floating data center on a container ship where all the containers can be hired by alternative internet service providers, called the Good Ship Anonymous, making the internet physical. WikiLeaks. A tent, the tent-based data center seen here, kind of more like a mobile data center, and a hypothetical data center on the border between Norway and Russia. It's exactly at the point where now refugees are coming in through the northernmost border of Norway, where there's a very interesting bit where Norway and Russia share a border, and they of course also have different political worlds in a way. So we thought it would be really interesting to have a circular data center based on the CERN model of the super collider, and half of it is in Norway, half of it is in Russia. And of course the information, when Norway is looking for the information that it needs, it's always in Russia, and when Russia is looking for the information it wants, it's always in Norway. So you have two freedom of information regimes coexisting. It's not entirely worked out into detail, but I still like the model because it's abstract, it's glossy, it has something. I don't know. So much of our more recent work has to do with seeking connections with pop culture, and I think because pop culture has another level of legibility in terms of these difficult political stuff that I'm trying to talk about here. And one way in which we've done that is with working together with Holly Herndon, the musician, artist, composer, performer, who has made a breakthrough album, came out last year, Platform, which has shaken the world of electronic dance music and taken it by storm in a way. But it's not her first album, but we've been collaborating with them since they started working towards that album. And we released in 2014 her label Revenge, now 4AD Records, released a video for her song Home, which is a song about the NSA and about the National Security Agency sort of surveillance policies. And we made these data rains, in a sense, consisting of different symbols that came from the PowerPoint presentations of the NSA. So they had this really cheeky way of addressing the internet in their own internal affairs and their own platforms, where CIA would be in a cloud and the internet would be called a cloud. And I'm just citing from what I see here. They had clouds for everything. Even the entire internet was a cloud, all with this really weird Microsoft symbol language in a way. So kind of internal branding of the NSA. These are screen grabs from the video for Home, and this was a kind of bubblegum NSA. Also, sometimes they change into walls, etc., and all the time there's Holly singing there. Okay, this is the Earth seen from the moon, for a change. More stuff from Home. So we also collaborate, so the collaboration ongoing. And last year we co-organized a fundraiser for Chelsea Manning at Berghain in Berlin. And we made T-shirts for the occasion that were sold, and etc. And also that has raised thousands of euros for Chelsea Manning for her legal representation. And this was joined by 2 T-shirts, one free Chelsea Manning with Holly's face in the background, and chains that form tears in a way, and a new term, Paradise Politics, together with a lock that goes open, so it's got a sort of unlocking. And the other said, infiltrate with love, and that slogan was made by Jake Applebaum, another groundbreaking programmer and internet activist involved in this, who became involved in Holly's work as well. And these are other expressions for Holly that didn't quite make it to the end. Terrorchism, trying to find a sort of sweeter way, seeing that love maybe has a kind of subversive power. Eventually stuff that did make it. Holly Herndon, Paradise Politics. And all our design is also utopian in the sense that it's quite layered and quite fragmented and quite overlaying each other. So there's sometimes you have to really look for the message, and the message is more an atmosphere, a feeling, a construction, an architecture, or a kind of fantasy world in a way. So we're really interested in design where the viewer has to do some work. We also interviewed Chelsea Manning for Paper Mag, and she was in prison, so this was all done by email, and the email were then printed out and given to her, and she supposedly wrote down this stuff, the answers by hand, and then eventually it was published in paper, which is also a way to getting another type of audience having a look at this, at these issues, because there's this tendency in really kind of like fashion or whatever that only kind of lifestyle related, directly lifestyle related or aesthetics related things are important, but in fact this person is also a icon for gay and trans community and has politicized this issue in her own very, very particular and relevant way, because she announced that she was female while she previously was known as male on the day of her verdict, 35 years in prison, and she changed. And this is huge, groundbreaking, about the type of sovereignty that we still have over our own lives. Album, platform. And these are some more romantic stills from a music video for Holly as well, Interference. The reason I'm not showing these videos is because there's going to come a lot of video work later, so I don't want to just, have everything be video work. Interference is also a song about collectiveness, in a way, and how to make new collectives. There is she again. We also did shots with a kind of weird pond that we made in our garden in the studio. And we made like this kind of water lilies of plastic that were supposed to talk about the plastic soup, but that didn't really work out. Actually, the sad story of this video is that all the material was shot for another song, and then eventually that did not become the single. So we had lots of material that thematically had nothing to do with the new song. So we had to allocate that in some way. Here, these two people are playing a game of war, a game that Guy Debord designed in the late 70s, early 80s. Guy Debord, the Situationist founder. And we had the game remade, but in the video, the game is kind of overthrown and there's collaboration instead of conflict. So two people holding each other. And like some of our work, it has this kind of dark architectural feel to it. There's sort of adventurous, dark. And this is Holly in Amsterdam. So Amsterdam, as you know, is a city that is known for its picturesque city center. So at the time, there was someone who worked with us, and she was sent out to go like location search for the video. And she came back with all these pictures from like the canals and with like beautiful 17th century houses, etc. And of course, we didn't need that. So eventually, we ended up in this underpass in somewhere. Anyway, so there she was, dressed in a sort of Japanese survival tracksuit. So this is a watch we designed. It's a watch that doesn't have the time, but is supposed to have a ink that is changing color when there's wireless signal. And at the time, people told us, you can do it. This absolutely, our lab can do it, but it turned out to be more difficult than that. So this is actually heat-sensitive ink. But it's supposed to be a watch that tells you that there's wireless, which is pretty much everywhere. So it would always light up. So we are interested in the ways in which the internet, the way that we use media is changing also our physical lives and the way that we deal with things like social reality and time, those types of things. And that leads to sets of transformations, sets of ways in which work is always made to look different and developing, etc. So apart from being researcher and being, as Lisa pointed out, doing our homework, because it sounded sometimes like we always do proper research. We do that, but we are also intuitive. So we also love to just do something and not be so worried about whether it sort of theoretically makes sense or not. So we love both, and we love the freedom that both have. But on the other hand, it's also very difficult to have both these things coexist in a design practice. That is indeed speculative. On the left-hand side, another announcement for one of those WikiLeaks dark stores that we used for the fundraiser. And on the right-hand side, a speculative identity for Belgium, designed in 2011, I believe. Not going to theorize about this. So, 2000. Rem Koolhaas discovers that the world's major currencies put together spell yes. Yen, euro, dollar. Let this sink in for a while. 2016. Metahaven discovers that the last name initials of the world's major authoritarians put together spell pet. Putin, Erdogan, Trump. So here's your answer. So we are entering an age of unfortunately, of unprecedented opportunities for authoritarians. What's the architecture? What's the media architecture of that story? That's what our new film is about, The Sprawl, Propaganda About Propaganda, which premiered at the Rotterdam Film Festival in this year. Luckily to a sold-out audience in a huge cinema that we had never seen our work that big. And it was a nice experience, but we thought, okay, now we have seen what we did, and we didn't do cinema, we made video. So there is still a lot to learn for us in this space, in a way. But the film is about the fictional worlds that are created by propaganda, and the good and bad sides of that. So it's whilst it's a critical film, it's also a celebration of propaganda in a strange way. And much of it is set in Ukraine and Russia, so much of the conflict of Ukraine and Russia has made its way into the film. And then there's also more fictional scenes, or scenes where narrator takes gives her take on propaganda, but also a lot of emphasis on the infrastructure of propaganda, which you could say is nowadays no longer separate media. So it used to be newspaper, radio, film, television, etc., and posters, and now it's the internet. Everything is converged on the internet, so all the different media of propaganda have converged on the internet. That creates a new atmosphere for it, a new ecology for it. So it's about disinformation, filter bubbles, myths, fantasies, interfaces, and the post-democratic redistribution of production value. And with that, we mean the ability for everyone to make really high-resolution video. That is primarily what we mean by that. So if you have a little bit of an effective propaganda machine, you need to have 3D, you need to have you need to have After Effects, you need to have all these things, and you need to have, in a way, all this kind of software weaponry that that was assumed once it was distributed in a way that would favor Western countries, in some sense. It would favor capitalism, it would favor all kinds of discourses, but it favors inevitably and eventually everyone who has these technologies. So we're going to watch, now you can turn it down a little bit, we're going to watch, not the volume, but the light. We're going to watch the beginning of the film, which is conversation between two guys that were probably involved in the downing of the Malaysia Airlines jet over Ukraine. Has in July 2014. People know about that, right? That plane that went down, that was shot down, okay? And then there's a little poem, a part of a poem by the Russian poet Anna Akhmatova.
Они довели до перекрестка, машину оставили. Пацаны пошли дальше сами. Так. Все, машина ушла туда, куда надо. И дошла нормально, все. Там начались непонятные звонки от 10 человек. А какие 10? Ну, на его номер начали звонить разные люди, представляться, что то один, то второй, то третий, то четвертый, то который сам начал звонить, болтается. И он взял, выключил телефон, блядь, и пиздец. И мы не знаем, где машина вообще. Машина в России. Блядь, вчера, говорю, блядь, мы не знаем ночью, блядь.
Тихо льется тихий дон. Желтый месяц входит в дом. Входит в шапке на бекрень. Входит желтый месяц, тень. Эта женщина больна. Эта женщина одна. Муж в могиле, сын в тюрьме. Помолитесь обо мне.
Yeah, so there is this infrastructure, there is mega structure in a way, which is visualized as this upside down highway, which is a very low budget way of making science fiction. You merely turn the image upside down. But what is propaganda nowadays? And this is a rather biased answer from one of our interviewees, Peter Pomerantsev. Maybe the lights could be off for this one. Thank you.
I used to think that propaganda was about persuading people. Jacques Ellul, who wrote the classic study of propaganda in the 1960s, French philosopher, called it mass persuasion. He didn't see propaganda as good or bad. He said it was a part of modern society, part of technological society, a part of mass industrialized society, whether it's getting people to wear condoms or to get them to become Maoist. Soviet propaganda used to be, believe in communism. Moscow is the shining beacon on the socialist hill. Now it doesn't seem to be about that. It's just about deconstructing the other side, disrupting Western narratives of any sort. There's a steady stream of disinformation whose purpose seems to be to sort of undermine the very idea that truth is provable.
So here he's primarily talking about that from a sort of perspective of the West, I guess, where you can say that countries that the West has a problematic relationship with, like Russia, are seen to be spreading propaganda or creating narratives in the world that are confusing. But of course there's always a bias when you say something like that, because it's not as if Western media are objective, it's not as if there's no propaganda from the other side. And obviously we're interested in ways in which propaganda as a design phenomenon, perhaps, or an art phenomenon, is something that is propagated by the infrastructure of the internet and not so much by the intent of any nation state in particular. So you could say that propagandistic units are using the capacity of the internet to make us believe in a certain bubble or a certain closed world. So the word filter bubble was used before. And a filter bubble, for those who don't know it, is what happens when your Facebook feed, for example, is only showing you stuff that you already know and like. So in other words, when the feed is optimized around the way in which the algorithm has learned from your previous browsing behavior, meaning that eventually you'll get stuff that you like, and the internet and platforms, nice music, are working that way. So, for example, when you are on YouTube and you're watching a press conference about whatever Russia, the next thing you'll get is a piece of Russia Today. Then you'll get a Putin speech, and then you click next video on YouTube. It will be a military parade in Moscow. You know, the next thing will be a actual tank battle in eastern Ukraine. So there is this way in which YouTube enhances and accelerates, and in a way escalates your interest. That's what happened to us a lot when we were doing our research, etc. You become a kind of you become a sort of Russian fanatic at some point. So in a way, we are building those virtual realities, even though they're not necessarily in the Oculus Rift yet, or they're not necessarily attached to our eyes. We are building worlds for ourselves through our interfaces, through through the way in which we try to make sense of the world around us, that are collections of propaganda sometimes. So you can say that, for example, climate change denial, which is a huge issue on the American right, is in a way a virtual reality. It's in a way you can say that people that say that climate change doesn't exist, it's an invention of the left, etc., although they don't sit with their heads in a virtual reality headset, they do believe in a kind of virtual reality. And in a way what you get is more and more of these bubbles and virtual realities. And as Lisa was asking about Trump, what do we think about Trump? Well, we think he's someone who masters this bubble architecture quite well.
Звездный потолок, парящая мегаструктура, облако, блестящая поверхность реки, зеркало, неправда, ложь, технология, патология, желание, платформа, дорога, карта, сеть, назначение.
So the film is intersected by bits of this architecture, and also by these people that are looking at computer screens, gazing, sort of screen gazers, who at some point in the film also become kind of more active, and they start to sort of dance and wield swords, etc. So it's a kind of critical lyrical film. So I think here critical design and lyrical design are coming together in the sprawl. And one moment in which this happened, for example, is when we are going back a little bit to the definition of art that was given by Leo Tolstoy in his pamphlet, What is Art? A book that everyone should read. Because he defines art as something as being pure communication of emotion, whether or not there is a sincere source to that. So in this video that you'll see now, Tolstoy talks about the origin of, like, let's say, an experience like the boy that has seen a wolf, and he communicates how that felt and how fearful he was of the wolf in the forest, and if people that listen to him feel the same thing, then that's art. But if he didn't meet the wolf, and people feel the same thing, even though it's fictional, it's also art. So he claimed that, art doesn't need to be real. It doesn't need to be sincere. There can be things that are fictional, never happened, can be communicated as art. anyway, we felt it important to go back a little bit further in Russian literature, poetry, etc., than only Putin speeches, etc., although there will be a Putin speech later on, I'm warning you, just to feel a little bit more of this mentality where fact and fiction are shifting.
Искусство начинается тогда, когда человек с целью передать другим людям испытанные им чувства снова вызывает его в себе и известными внешними знаками выражает его. Так самый простой случай. Мальчик, испытавший, положим, страх встречи с волком, рассказывает эту встречу, и для того, чтобы вызвать в других испытанные им чувства, изображает себя, свое состояние перед этой встречей, обстановку, лес, свою беззаботность и потом вид волка, его движение, расстояние между ним и волком и тому подобное. Все это, если мальчик вновь при рассказе переживает испытанные им чувства, заражает слушателей и заставляет их пережить все, что и пережил рассказчик, есть искусство. Если мальчик и не видал волка, но часто боялся его, и, желая вызвать чувство испытанного им страха в других, придумал встречу с волком и рассказывал ее так, что вызвал своим рассказом то же чувство в слушателях, какое он испытывал, представляя себе волка, то это тоже искусство.
Right. So that's all still a little bit in the beginning. So you can say that when you're looking at propaganda, forget the state and think about the platform. Think about the infrastructure in which all these things can be true at the same time. Because not everything can be true at the same time in reality, but everything can be true at the same time on the internet.
На улицах города я не больше, чем призрак. Я обитаю в мегаструктуре. Я привязана к небесам, подвешена вверх ногами в неопределенности, без конца и начала.
So there's in the film we look at actual propaganda as well. It's not just metaphors and ways in which we can talk about propaganda, but we also try to address some of the material that we actually found mostly on YouTube, and then subsequently licensed that from the different content providers, among which RT, Russia Today. So we're going to look at a little bit now, if you don't mind. Do we still have time? Kind of like tight, right? Okay. Well, we can also just quickly go through. Oops. Wait. Post-Snowden security. Invest in the Swiss cloud. A little commercial break. Came at the right moment. Thanks for speeding me up. I'm not sure then if we're actually going to look at this. Maybe not. No. So we can say that production value. 4K GoPro drones flew over Syria. The Internet Party of Ukraine had Darth Vader run for office. And ISIS's Adobe Premiere licenses were shipped from the North Caucasus. So again, it's about disinformation, filter bubbles, myths, fantasies, interfaces, and the post-democratic redistribution of production value.
Politics in an era of globalization. The breakdown of the sense that actually the governments can do anything. It's that sense of who's really in charge. Your government can do any policy it likes, but a butterfly flaps its wings in China, and a village in Birmingham is unemployed. It's part of the paranoia and part of the sense of globalization, which in Europe heightened even more by the idea of an EU above national governments. So governments used to be like in the West, look how big and strong we are. Now they're like, we can't do anything. We can't do it. It's like it's the EU. It's globalization, sorry. So governments get into this and get into this game and actually end up exacerbating the lack of faith in them by saying, well, we can't do anything,
Определять и изменять конституционный строй Украины принадлежит исключительно народу и не может быть узурпировано государством либо должностным лицом. Неважно, каким способом и образом они пришли к власти, в том числе через кровь.
When we say Twitter revolution, what do we mean?
The disputed June 12th elections in Iran, when that then erupted into street protests in Tehran, over the course of the next couple of days, there were enough people on the ground in Tehran with cell phones to get messages out, and then those got rebroadcasted all over the world.
Была целая череда управляемых цветных революций.
So here Putin is starting to talk about these color revolutions, etc. This is the known, line that they have all the time now. But basically the film follows that line a little bit. And let me just, I think you should see this. And I think if we end with this, it's fine. Because this is actually the video that we got licensed from not just these guys, but what comes straight after these guys is what actually kicked off, I think, the whole film, why we wanted to make the film. And we eventually got in contact with a guy who did that video, and you'll see that woman back that you just saw, the chief prosecutor of Crimea after the Crimean annexation of Crimea by Russia. So here are two guys talking about the situation after they have been sort of called back from Ukraine, and they're sort of like frustrated, and they wish that Putin had gone a little bit further, which he didn't. They're sitting there, and as a nice note that you won't see in this shot, or maybe you will, but it's revealed later, on the wall is a portrait of Tolstoy.
Неожиданным было резкая, на мой взгляд, резкая смена вектора движения нашего президента. То есть я уже об этом говорил, о том, что реально он начал революцию сверху, вступление в Крым.
С ожиданием будут слушать бой кремлевских курантов и с гордостью смотреть выступления нашего президента. Мы, как полноправные граждане России, поднимем бокалы за нашу Родину, за нашу землю, за нашу великую святую Русь. И пусть Господь нам помогает хранить ее, беречь ее, укреплять ее, со словами Николая II. Нет такой жертвы, которую я бы не принес, чтобы спасти Россию.
Yeah, so with 25,000 YouTube views, this is probably one of the most famous pieces in that genre, in a way. And in the film, we struggled a lot because we did some interventions here and there, but in the beginning we had someone talking over it, like so halfway the thing is fading away, and then someone's going to talk about it like a bad DJ, talking over the record. So we were like, well, we just have to feature the whole thing. I'm going to end with a quote from Peter Sloterdijk, one of our favorite philosophers, as far as we can understand him. This is a particularly beautiful quote it's from the beginning of his book Spheres. And it speaks to propaganda, and this is something we will be doing more with in forthcoming works. The child stands enraptured on the balcony, holding its new present and watching the soap bubbles float into the sky as it blows them out of the little loop in front of his mouth. Now a swarm of bubbles erupts upwards, as chaotically vivacious as a throw of shimmering blue marbles. When the bubble finally bursts, the soap bubble artist on the balcony emits a sound that is at once a sigh and a cheer, For the duration of the bubble's life, the blower was outside of himself, as if the little orb's survival depended on remaining encased in an attention that floated out with it. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we've been in propaganda as dystopia or utopia, but at least...
What was it for you?
Nicely frightening, lovely, striking, and like oxymores, I would say, for me.
Uh-huh.
It was a series of oxymorons, really.
Okay.
It's time for questions. I'm sure there are plenty. So I'm going to come with a mic.
I have a question about the recent book that came out. What is the code behind those circles on the cover?
Oh no, it's okay. No, it's actually just the acronym BT, slightly abstracted. So it's actually just the acronym for the title Black Transparency. There's no code. You're not the first one asking that question, though. There was someone who thought it was Morse code. Someone even translated what it would mean in Morse code, which was gibberish.
I think it's pretty normal that we become paranoid.
Also, everything must mean something. No, but it's just a perforation.
Hello. Thank you very much for this presentation. I joined you a bit later, but it was amazing. I really found it really amazing. Thank you very much for coming. My question was, why the movie was upside down? Why did you film it upside down?
Only the highway.
Yeah. Well,
the real reason that happened was because Vinca was in Korea and she wanted to film the highway, and she put the thing on her like rear view mirror, and the camera was upside down. So we were looking at this footage and we were like, holy, this is actually quite nice. And then we thought, like, isn't this the cloud? Isn't this like isn't this like this kind of global infrastructure that seems to hover over us? So it was sort of like, it came like some of this stuff looked really infrastructural with like, I don't know, buildings and stuff like that. And we felt like it looks a little bit heavenly, and it looks like a mirror a little bit. And so we were like, okay, this will be our way of describing the internet. And filmmakers that have seen this find it for the first few seconds a really cheap trick. They're like, nah, you can't do that. But then sometimes, they accept it and they like it. But yeah, it's not that we say in the film like, oh, this is what it is. It's sort of, you have to kind of feel that a little bit in the film. But sometimes they talk about platform and you see an upside down highway, so you kind of like get it. But apparently you didn't, so we still have some work to do. Next time, something else.
I mean, it was great. It gave another perspective. It just, you don't see that in usual movies, so that was my question. Thank you.
I just quickly I'm really intrigued by the sort of style, use of style, and the sort of your graphic design, and I'm intrigued about the kind of, there's a sort of an adoption of certainly 80s early computer, and this is something I noticed. I've got a teenage son and there's a whole kind of, feels like very much a subculture of adoption of 80s vaporwave, kind of ironic at one end, but then more sort of politically subversive at the other. Can you sort of, is there, in terms of your practice, what draws you to those sort of...
Could we have the image back for a second? Could we have the... Yeah, so here's our Tumblr. So it's just good to browse back a little bit. Like, oh yeah, here were those videos that Lisa talked about. I don't think we've ever consciously made something to look 80s or something. We don't think in those terms. We don't think like, oh, let's make it look 90s or whatever. But it turns out that the way that we started making work in the... Oh, there's no... Is everything okay?
Yeah, I think that's a crude characterization.
Yeah,
I suppose it's about kind of early digital
but
tools.
When we started out, like, it was a kind of post-internet already in 2005 or something when we started. Like, when we did our first things, we wanted to be... the things that we did to be very ornate. So we wanted it to be very kind of like overloaded. At the time, the prevailing language was a kind of pre-financial crisis sushi bar minimalism, and we were kind of like against that. We were like, design needs to be... It's really medieval and baroque and it tells stories, etc. And don't be too. We wanted to do something that would be really kind of like expressive about aesthetics. And then, so we've always believed in a sort of maximalism, I think. And then, of course, what always happens is that all these visual style periods are being recycled, and you get like things like post-internet and stuff like that, which is basically lots of 90s aesthetics that are being packaged in a sort of aqua architecture in a way. So I think most of our work... it's starting to do weird things now? I don't know. This is actually a funny joke. LinkedIn Park. So I guess we do have a kind of weird sense of humor somehow.
It's
stroboscopic even. That's amazing. Maybe we can switch the image off now, because this is not something I want you to endure for any longer. But we are always interested in visual and the visual story of a piece as a story in itself, and not just in the plain translation of an idea. And often the way that we work, it works against communication, because often the way in which we design something means that you can't read it anymore in a way, or you can't understand it anymore in a kind of more direct way. And attempts that we've done to work with political parties or whatever, we have done so many attempts to sort of make it work out. But somehow there is something where if we want to really solve a problem, then it turns out that the person that we do that for resigns from the party and we are lost. This happened to us a lot. So eventually believe in paradise aesthetics for paradise politics.
I suppose for me it sets a nice... It puts you very much in a kind of traditional modernist, minimal, graphical sort of history, and so sets out a nice... I mean, it sort of reminds me of sort of... It's a subversive aesthetic in some ways. It feels like a kind of a counter... There's something countercultural about it. That's interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure they asked you this question already. And maybe it's a question for a lot of designers, photographers, journalists. But you and all the people that share the same approach to visual arts, what do you think of the ethical problem of the appropriation?
Of appropriation, like copyright, you mean?
Appropriation of the actual facts that you embed in your work, like tragedies, like different disciplines.
Tragedies and different disciplines. I mean, the tragedy is interesting, I think, because that was, for example, when making the sprawl, we included that poem at the beginning about the Don area, where there's this woman and her husband's dead and her son is in jail, etc., to address this, to address the fact that there's a human cost to all this propaganda bullshit. Like there is something about it that is inescapably tragical about it. So, and I think, I mean, the kind of explanation that says, just look at the internet and don't look at physical reality anymore and just look at what everyone's doing on YouTube or whatever is just sort of highly problematic. So I think if you're dealing with an ethically problematic topic like propaganda, you have to be very conscious of the human aspect of it in a way. And I think that the way in which this film was made was not, we were simply not capable of having a kind of underground presence in Russia or Ukraine to talk with people. But I know in the kind of next films, although kind of slightly more fictional, we're going to focus much more on this kind of more personal or emotional side, you know, basically a kind of trauma, not just the trauma of experiencing like war, but also the trauma of experiencing the digital. Because I think that we are all in some sense traumatized by the way that we interact with our devices every day. I think that we are all carry a trauma in a sense, and we're going to try and bring that out.
Last question? No one? Sure?
Sorry, I'm being greedy.
Personne, pas de question, même si elles sont en français, on peut les traduire. Adjugé vendu.
So sorry, one last question. I think was interesting with a room full of students is too, and something I suppose that didn't come out in the talk is how you support your practice and how does that kind of economy work of and how can people do the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, I think I'm really happy that you asked that question, because when Lisa started, she gave an amazing speech, but she ended with the most arrogant quote that you could possibly pull from our kind of collection of quotes with regard to, you know, the reality of doing design, you know. And I think when I started doing this, because I had another studio before Metahaven, and I was kind of intent to say, like, you know, we're going to do only research and nothing else, you know, and we'll see how that supports itself. But in fact, without a major institutional backer, you can't sort of do that sort of stuff. So if you are just working your way through teaching jobs and assignments, etc., you will have to make a combination of things. So you cannot solve it by a pure aesthetic model of the designer as a pure researcher, because unless there will be a kind of a tenure track appointment for that type of person, it's never going to work out. So that's why we also are not stimulating people to work like we do. We are saying that everyone should politicize or whatever in their own way, and every way of politicizing your practice or following your passions is as valid as anyone else's. So I feel that in fact this tendency where designers are saying, like, you know, do as we do, you know, do as is wrong. You know, it's a sort of pedantic idea that the designers have that have visibility, that they can then instruct others to do the same thing. I don't believe in that. I think that it's hard enough to be a designer nowadays with the way that institutions are changing their relationship with design, in the fact that commitment is changing, etc. You know, the fees are also going down because computers can do design better than humans at some point. Not all design, but some design can be done by computer. So what is the way in which designers can still create new bubbles for themselves? And in a way, all our teaching at Sandberg, Yale, and also European Graduate School is all about that. It's all about how can you create something that will grow into the thing that you are known for, that you like to do, that you're good at, and that you can iterate through your work. Of course, then you'll eventually get some money for that as well, and then that will lead to a livelihood. So we have lots of faith in people. Like in the past, you had this idea of the designer as someone who basically picks up the phone, starts working. Has never been really true, but it was kind of true. And now you have to be kind of a little bit more proactive. So I encourage people, in fact, to be proactively going towards the thing that they love or that they are intrigued by. And that merging that with design will lead to something good. That's one thing I can kind of know from experience. But it doesn't need to look like us, you know. It can look something else. And that's what everyone is trying, or many people are trying. So I don't think of our work as this proprietary thing, you know, that you have. We're in a sense part of a kind of wave that's transforming graphic design and visual culture. And we're happy with that.
Yeah, so I think that was great that you finished with Dom's questions about students. I will not read that, but I have a quote that when you're talking, I just said the first sentence because you remember that, why are design students always perceived as better than their teacher? That comes from one of your interviews, and then you explain that kind of thing. So I think it's really nice to finish with the student position, because most of
Always stay student.
Yes, always stay students, because you're always then better than your professors. No, that's not what you meant exactly. But so I really wanted to thank you, Danielle, very, very much. We wanted to do these talking head a year ago, so I've been really, really I was really dreaming to have Danielle to give this talk, so we did it. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And